morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, the very hub, the very heart, and the nerve center of the Women in Public Service Project. And as Bryn Mawr's historic institute comes to an end, we are proud to claim our 44 sisters from around the world to our ever-growing assembly of women leaders in public service. Welcome to our sisterhood. Welcome to the Women in Public Service Project's global network. I want to start by honoring some of the key architects of the program, both at Bryn Mawr, the institute that you belong to, as well as the Women in Public Service Project. Farah Pandit, the special representative for Muslim communities, is no stranger to all of you. She is one of those who envisioned the Women in Public Service Project and incubated the project at the State Department, historically in partnership with the Seven Sisters Colleges that Bryn Mawr is so much a part of. I also want to acknowledge and celebrate Ruth Lindenberg. As you know, she's no stranger to both your institute as well as to the institutes around the world. She has been very instrumental right from the start, both as a brain trust, someone who's been so very critical to the founding and to the growth of the program. Thank you, Ruth. And of course, Jessica Burns, the director of the Bryn Mawr. I want to take a moment to also celebrate Bryn Mawr's past president, who has been such an inspiration to the Women in Public Service Project and was indeed a founding mother of the Women in Public Service Project, President Jane McAuliffe. And of course, her successor, the interim president, Kimberly Cassidy, who has also continued the work that was started by President Jane McAuliffe. And it is because of all of these founding mothers, these names that I have mentioned, that you are here with us today. And I want to thank Bryn Mawr for really making use of the Women in Public Service Project's Nerve Center as the hub and bringing you here to us, because now you belong to us. Partly. Secretary Clinton, as you know, is our founder. And she issued a clarion call in Beijing nearly 20 years ago, which galvanized the world. She said, what we always knew instinctively, women's rights are human rights. And the Women in Public Service Project is part of that continuum, that call to action that continues through the Women in Public Service Project. Secretary Clinton recently stated that women are not victims. We are agents of change. We are drivers of progress. We are makers of peace. All we need is a fighting chance. And the Women in Public Service Project is the chance that women have to amplify their voices as agents of change and drivers of progress. By now, you're familiar with the narrative of the Women in Public Service Project. This was founded at the State Department by the Secretary in partnership with the Seven Sisters Colleges, but I'm proud to say that today it has grown to be a global presence. It has become now the premier platform for Women in Public Service Project around the world and has now come to include over 35 universities that have joined the call to action to ensure 50 by 50, 50% of women in public service positions by 2050. We have over 35 governments that have committed and rededicated their resources to the clarion call of 50 by 50. So we are now indeed on our way to realize the goal, however challenging it is, of 50 by 50. The story, the narrative of the Women in Public Service Project is best shared with you through the voices of the emerging women leaders, your sisters who are part of the Women in Public Service Project and who were members of institutes that came before Bryn Mawr. Wafa Bughaides, a delegate from Libya, went back after the first institute to organize 200 women's groups to call for constitutional reform in a transitioning Libya. And because of her call to action, a quota was enshrined in the constitution, and just last month she was appointed as the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs in Libya, a first for women in Libya. And she stated in her manifesto, when Libya called, we gave our sons and our hearts. We will not be second-class citizens anymore, not now, not ever. Yesterday, I had a visit from Nahid Farid, the youngest member of parliament at 27 years of age in Afghanistan, probably one of the youngest members of parliament in the world. And she said, in my question to her, what has the Women in Public Service Project given you? She said, I went back with my resolve strengthened to make sure that there would be no rollback of the domestic violence law that we helped to create but is yet to be passed by the Afghanistan parliament. I will stay strong. I will not allow any erosion to the clause that states, that defines polygamy and child marriage as violence against women. So this is one of the most groundbreaking provisions in any domestic violence law, where polygamy and child marriage has been raised to a level where it has been defined as not just a threat to women's security, but a threat to human security. And that is why your institute on peace and security is such a clarion call to action. It sends out the message to the world that women's issues belong in peace building and in conflict resolution. As of today, you now join the ranks of Nahid Farid and Wafa Bughaides. You're going to go back to your countries and your communities as change agents and as drivers of progress. I wonder how many of you have read the Foreign Policy magazine's Power Issue. The editor of Foreign Policy's Power Issue, Rothkopf, points out that only 10% of those identified as the most important persons in foreign policy are women. And he says, the systematic, persistent acceptance of women's second-class status is history's greatest shame. You're now in the nation's capital, where foreign policy is being made. And you have brought, and Bryn Mawr has brought together 44 of the world's best foreign policy leaders, all women, assembled at the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., to send out a cry, enough is enough, no more second-class citizenship. You are all leaders in national policy and by virtue of belonging to the Women in Public Service Project, foreign policy. And that is why, as Secretary Clinton has said, women's leadership is the unfinished business of the 20th century. And the Women's Public Service Project that you now belong to is about finishing that business. Thank you very much.
On behalf of our delegates, Bryn Mawr College, and the entire Women in Public Service Project Institute team, I thank the Wilson Center for hosting the 2 panels that we're about to embark on. Our institute benefits from a productive partnership with the Office of Jane Harmon, who's the president and CEO of the Wilson Center, and Rangita and her entire team at the Global Women's Leadership Initiative. And we're very grateful for your support and collaboration. Thank you for that. As director of the inaugural Women in Public Service Project Institute at Wellesley College last June and the subsequent institute that took place at the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh, Rangita deeply appreciates what goes into creating a meaningful institute program, and she's led the Women in Public Service Project through a dynamic first year of programming, and I know there's much more to come, and we are benefiting from that continuously. It's been an honor for me to serve as the director of the Women in Public Service Institute, Peacebuilding and Development at Bryn Mawr College. I encourage those of you in the audience who have yet to meet our 43 delegates to do so during the coffee break. Our delegates are a remarkable repository of knowledge and experience, and I've greatly enjoyed my time with them over the last weeks, and we're not finished. We have a few more days together, so I don't want to rush us through the end of the Institute. I'm glad to turn things over now to Jolynn Shoemaker, who is the Interim Program Director at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. Jolynn is a recognized leader and expert in the area of women, peace, and security, and most recently served as the Executive Director of Women in International Security. Many of you may know that organization. It's the only global network actively advancing women's leadership at all stages of their careers in international peace and security. So it's a really good fit to have Jolynn with us today, and I'm grateful that you're sharing your time. Thank you. And thanks to our panelists.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to quickly say what an honor it is to be here among all of you. Just amazing women leaders from around the world. It never ceases to amaze me and inspire me to meet so many of you, and I hope that I'll have the chance to talk to a few of you before I leave today. And I just also wanted to just say, Rangita and to Jessica, what an amazing job, and to congratulate you both on this program. Of course, this morning we're talking about how change happens, and of course that's something that we could spend all day talking about, certainly, I think, and all of you delegates, each one of you could really lead that discussion because you're up against resistance, and you're really thought leaders and change leaders in your countries. So I hope we'll have some time for discussion, but we have an amazing panel here today with years of experience and actually a very diverse set of experience to share, and I think that we'll all learn a lot and have many questions and food for thought regarding what they all have to say. So let me quickly just introduce, and I'm going to go from, well, actually, I'll start with Elaine. Elaine Kmark is a senior fellow in governance studies at Brookings, and she directs the management and leadership initiative there. And Elaine brings a wealth of experience on government innovation and reform. She's worked on presidential campaigns, was a senior staffer at the White House, spent 15 years at Harvard University, and has written numerous books on government, politics, presidential campaigns, and making public policy work. So it's a real pleasure to have you with us today. Next up, Ambassador Carol Rodley. Ambassador Rodley is the Dean of Leadership and Management at the Leadership and Management School at the Foreign Service Institute, which trains our diplomats here in the United States. She was ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia. She's been, for a number of years, an advisor before she was dean at the Foreign Service Institute. She also served at our embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, and headed up our Bureau of Intelligence and Research in the State Department, as well as many other postings throughout her career in the U.S. Foreign Service. So welcome, Ambassador Rodley. And I wanted to just mention that Ambassador Rodley has been a real leading voice on human capital and infrastructure issues as well. So I think that will be extremely timely and interesting to all of you. And next up, we're very happy to have one of the delegates up here to talk a little bit, Azra Jafari. She is the first woman mayor in Afghanistan. And and has been working on constitutional issues and a number of issues, of course, paving the way in difficult circumstances as a female leader and role model in Afghanistan. So we welcome you here today, and I know everyone's very anxious to hear your perspectives. Jerry White, here to my left, is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Partnerships and Learning in the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations here at the State Department. And Jerry has a long history as a leader in the non-governmental space, a leading voice on survivorship and resilience. It's his specialty after a very personal event seemed to turn your life in a new direction with really working as one of the world's leaders on landmine survivor, building up and founding the Landmine Survivors Network, and working on nuclear arms control and leading civil society efforts in international obligations on a variety of issues, including cluster munitions and persons with disabilities and landmines. So your extensive experience in really leading change from the outside and on the inside, I think government and non-government will be incredibly interesting to hear about. So without delay, I want to just turn it over to the panelists. As you all know, we're running a little bit late on time, but we want to make sure that we have time for all of your remarks. But if you do have a chance to maybe end a little bit earlier than the 10 minutes, that would really help make sure that we have time for the delegates to ask questions. So I think maybe if we go left to right and start with Elaine this morning.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Bryn Mawr for having me here, and welcome all of you to Washington, D.C. I like this panel because it happens to have the title of my new book. So, and I hope it will inspire you to not only enact great change in your countries, but to buy my book too. And while my book is called How Change Happens or Doesn't, and it's mostly in the context of American politics, I thought I'd make a few remarks today that really are about change that would be in any society. The way I started thinking about this was with a kind of paradox. And I want to take you all the way back to 1946 in the United States and a president named Harry Truman. Now, nobody liked this guy. This guy was really, really unpopular. He became president when Franklin Roosevelt died. Franklin Roosevelt had been president for 16 years. You know, there were people in America who couldn't even imagine, okay, a president other than Franklin Roosevelt. And along comes this guy, Harry Truman. And everybody just dumped on him. I mean, everybody said, this guy is awful, this guy is awful. They called him stupid in public. They insulted him to a degree that, we sort of think there's a lot of polarization and insulting now in Washington. Let me take you to 1946. To tell you how bad it was, in those days when a president came back from touring the country, he came into Union Station, not into the airport because they didn't fly very much, and the tradition was that the entire cabinet would go to Union Station to welcome back the president. Well, when poor Harry Truman came back from campaigning in 1946 in November, nobody met him. Nobody met him. Okay, so this is a president in pretty big trouble. Second, let's look at the United States. We had millions of men coming home from the war in Europe. Okay, they were sick of Europe. This was the second generation of Americans that fought some ridiculous war that they didn't have anything to do with starting over in Europe. They had it up to here with Europe. They wanted to forget about Europe, come home, do their own thing. And they were not a happy bunch either. The Republican Party thought they saw a way to sort of reopen, their fortunes by, campaigning against U.S. intervention around the world, etc. Everything looked really bad for a program of giving so much money to Europe that it amounted to a very healthy percentage of U.S. GDP. And yet, against this backdrop, in 1947, the United States passed the Marshall Plan, and U.S. taxpayers funded an unheard of infusion of dollars into war-torn Europe. So what this made me ask myself was, what happened, right? If I'd described to you just in the abstract, this president, right, and the situation he was in and situation the country was in, you would have said, no way, right? No way are the American taxpayers going to do this kind of enormous influx of cash into Europe. And that got me thinking about change, okay? And what it told me is that change is not a linear process. There is no simple answer to change. There is no one story about how change happens. In fact, there are a multitude of stories, and each one is kind of sui generis. And therefore, while we can't have a theory of change, and in the academic world, I took on a bunch of political scientists who thought they could make a theory of change, and I said, no, you can't make a theory of change. What you can do, though, is you can look at pieces of change. Right? You can look and you can ask the right questions. And that's what I tried to do in here. So, for instance, one of the questions you want to ask about change is your public policy solution, is the thing you're trying to do, is it too complex? Because complexity, in fact, invites suspicion. If people don't get it, then the natural instinct is, we're not so sure we want to do that, right? So one of the problems we've been having in the United States is we have enormously complex legislation. And people are beginning to say to themselves, maybe complexity itself is an inhibitor to change. The second thing to look at is factions within political parties. So everybody thought that when, George Bush and Nancy Pelosi got together in 2007 to do an immigration bill, that surely the leader of the Republican Party and the leader of the Democratic Party ought to pass an immigration bill. Well, what they didn't understand is and including, by the way, the president, is that within their own parties, there were factions who had real reasons to be against change. Different reasons in each party, but they were against change. So just because a political party wins an election doesn't necessarily mean that change is going to happen. The third thing I looked at, and I'll end on this because I know we want to be quick here, is I looked at the role of insiders versus the role of outsiders. Not surprisingly, you find women in the outsider category, but they are change agents. And women's change, historically comes about with really sort of extraordinary stories. My favorite one is Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson was not rich. She was not of a prominent family. In fact, when her father died, she had to go to work here in the Interior Department in Washington for the princely sum of something like $16,000 a year. Okay, she had to support her family on that. But what she did love was she loved nature, and she read all the scientific studies about nature. And hidden in those scientific studies was the fact that a lot of the bad things we were putting into the environment, like DDT and various chemicals, were hurting not just animals and trees, they were hurting people. And what Rachel Carson, very mild-mannered, did was she put that puzzle together. Now again, she was not a PhD. She was not a scientist at Harvard. She was not from a prominent family. She was really outside the power structure. But the power structure in those days, we're talking sort of late 1950s, early 1960s in the United States, the power structure consisted of chemical companies, agricultural companies and their allies in the government. And the prevailing thought was chemistry was good for us, okay, because we had fewer crop failures, etc. Again, these weren't bad people necessarily. But they were seeing the world through one prism. Rachel Carson was not part of the in crowd. Let's face it, women often are not. And what she could do, because she wasn't part of that crowd, is she saw the pattern. She saw the way that chemistry looked like it was helping people, but in fact was causing cancer, was causing severe illness, was causing a sort of environmental disruption. And Rachel Carson, of course, had a gift that most of us, don't have. She could write beautifully. So in 1962, when she published her book, Silent Spring, it was an instant bestseller in the United States and around the world. By 1963, CBS did an entire television documentary on her book. And by 1966, there were Senate hearings on it, and the predecessor of what was to become the Environmental Protection Agency. She is the mother of the modern environmental movement. But when I think about what made her the mother, it was her outsider status that made her the mother. And of course, talent. I mean, she was a brilliant writer, okay? But she was not at all prominent, okay? And it just shows how change can happen from very, very humble beginnings. Needless to say, Rachel Carson is one of my heroes in my book. I spend a lot of time talking about her, and I think is particularly relevant for our discussion today. Final point about change is that, I have a whole chapter, I call it the Deus Ex Machina. You know what that is? That's that term in a stage play. Sometimes something comes out of the top of the stage and it just fixes everything, right? Just magically. Well, change is replete with Deus Ex Machina instances, all right? Times when nothing seems to be working, and suddenly something happens and the change moves, okay? And the agent of change knows, be alert to those opportunities. Those are windows that open briefly and close shut very quickly. So understanding that role, it's a kind of, let's face it, it's random, right? It's luck. But after all, some people who are attuned to this know when they can take advantage of those situations. So those are some of my ramblings about change. And I'm going to, in interest of time, I'm going to turn it over to whoever is the next panelist, I guess, Ambassador.
That would be me. So thank you. Good morning, and congratulations to all of you for being selected to be part of this really wonderful program. You're inspiring me just sitting there, imagining the stories that each and every one of you has to tell. And I mention stories deliberately because that's part of the way that I think about how change happens. Really, in a lot of ways, it's all about the stories that people tell, the stories that you tell about yourself, the stories that people tell about their countries and their societies and the places where they live and work. I'll talk mostly about Cambodia, which is the place that I know the best, the place where I was ambassador from 2008 to 2011. And just a very short history lesson to give you the context of what I'm going to say. I mean, Cambodia is a small and very, very poor country, one of the poorest countries in Asia. They had a terrible tragedy in their past, the genocide that happened under the Khmer Rouge from 1975 to 1979. In 1979, the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia and drove the Khmer Rouge out of the capital and out of power, but the conflict went on for another 20 years. The conflict in Cambodia only ended really definitively in 1999. So when I was getting ready to go back there, to go to Cambodia as ambassador in 2008, I was thinking about what my public message was going to be. And I knew the country very well. I'd spent 3 years there in the 1990s. And from my experience, I knew that the narrative that Cambodians told about themselves and about their country was a narrative of conflict, genocide, victimhood, a very backward-looking narrative. And I thought to myself, in order for them to move forward, the narrative has to change. So I made a decision that I was going to be relentlessly forward-looking in my public remarks, that I was going to seek out the people, the Cambodians, who were really looking to the future and dragging the country, taking the country toward the future, and focus on building a relationship between the United States and Cambodia that was looking to the future rather than looking back to the past. And there were plenty of people who were very, very stuck in the past. When I landed there in 2008, I discovered that actually the narrative had already changed inside Cambodia. Partly that was generational change. It's a very young country, full of, bright, hardworking, ambitious young people who are looking to make up for 30 years of lost time, 30 years of lost development. And I encountered all kinds of Cambodians who inspired me. Many of them were women, not all of them, but one of the other features of life and work in the developing world, an unfortunate one in my view that you sometimes encounter as an American representative, a diplomat, is that foreigners, especially from donor countries, aid-giving countries, are prone to want to tell people in those countries how to fix them. Maybe some of you have encountered that before. And in fact, if it was as easy as that, the problems would be fixed already. And who knows better how to fix the problems in a given place than the people who actually live there. So for me, it was so important to feature Cambodians telling their own stories, telling the narrative of what was going on in that place, what the problems were, and how to fix them. Now, for me, there are three important elements to affecting any kind of change, and that's changing attitudes, changing behavior, and changing the rules. And one of the problems is that most of the time you have to do all of those things at the same time, and none of them are easy. Not one of those things, is easy to do. But what's really important when you start off on a process of trying to deliver some big, important change is to have a vision. And for all of you, I would encourage you to have big visions. Don't bother having small ones. The world has too many hard problems. We need you to be tackling the biggest, most important ones. But then you have to be in it for the long term, because it's going to take longer than you expect, and certainly longer than you want. I have a couple of examples of that leadership that affected big and important change. I'll maybe just give two examples. Cambodia is a primarily agricultural country. And in the year 2000, Cambodia exported 0 rice. And for the previous 30 years, they had exported 0 rice. They were sometimes self-sufficient, sometimes had to import a little bit of rice for their own needs. In 2009, Cambodia exported almost 1 million tons of rice. So, and that would seem almost like one of those things that just dropped from the sky, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was actually the result of a lot of vision, long-term planning, and persistence in the face of obstacles. In a couple of key ministries in the government, people who had a vision. Back in 2000, when anyone would have laughed at the notion of Cambodia as a rice exporter, They had a vision of what Cambodia could become. There were a lot of pieces that had to come together, big, expensive infrastructure pieces, roads, rice mills, improved seed, but they kept at it, and they worked together, mostly young people, in a couple of key ministries, in the Commerce Ministry and the Agriculture Ministry, not the ministers themselves. The ministers were busy doing other things. Some of you know what those things, might be. But they had a vision, and they were connected to the people on the ground, the farmers on the ground. They knew that they could, if they kept at it, make this happen. And now, Cambodia is well on its way to becoming a powerhouse in Southeast Asia in the rice market. I want to give one other example because it's a woman and she's a friend of mine and I'm super proud of her. Some of you have probably heard of Somali Mom, who is a quite well-known campaigner in the anti-trafficking movement. She's a Cambodian woman. She was sold into a brothel by a relative when she was 12 years old. A terrible story, but not a terribly uncommon one. She managed to escape with the help of a foreigner when she was about 17 years old. She fled to France, but didn't stay long because she knew there were other young women back in Cambodia who needed her. And she felt that she could affect change attitudes, change behavior, and eventually change the rules. She came back to Cambodia and founded an organization devoted to helping women out of sex slavery. And she's been working at it ever since. She has now 3 centers in Cambodia where the victims, the survivors as they call themselves, not victims, where the survivors are cared for, educated, and helped to, if they can, reintegrate into society. But what she's taken it even a step further. Part of the reason I love this so much is that it's about training the survivors to tell their own stories. She founded an organization called Women for Change, and she trains the survivors of sex trafficking to go out and tell their stories in public. And it's hard to imagine how difficult this is because the stories are graphic and wrenching, but it has started to change attitudes in a deeply conservative, traditional country where for years, people thought nothing of the brothel culture, of the price that the women who worked in those brothels paid, of how they got there and what kind of conditions they lived in. Somali Mom has personally, through her efforts, through her witness, affected a pretty dramatic change in that society. And I can recommend her book to you since we're having a little book club discussion here. The Road of Lost Innocence by Somali Mom. The story of her life is an absolutely riveting read. So I will close in the interest of time by saying to you, my challenge to you who are all leaders out there in your own right, have a vision. Make it a big vision. Don't be deterred by obstacles. You will encounter them. You would be foolish to expect anything else. And find the way to tell the story, to tell the narrative of what you imagine your country, your little piece of the world can become. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody, and I'm very happy I'm here among you. And thank you very much from Women Public Service Institute for inviting me in here. And I would like to say about the Afghanistan during 10 years, what kind change we has especially the women. I think the big achievement for the women was rebuilding the Constitution Commission. According this commission, Constitution of Afghanistan. According to the Constitution of Afghanistan, a woman and a man is equal right now, and now the woman has education right, election right, and also the government signed a lot of law like CEDA, like elimination violence against women law, International Human Rights Declaration, and other declaration and laws the woman can use for movement and for more activity in this country. About education, during the Taliban, the woman can go to school. All schools was blocked in front of the woman. But now we have 4 million girls who goes to school. And now we have a lot of private school, private university and an institute, and also most of the women who get educated during 10 years, they go to other countries for bachelor's, for master's and PhD. It is, I think it is very great achievement for the women in Afghanistan. And about health, I think access to healthcare service, it's now better than to past, and especially in big cities, it is very good facilities for healthcare for women and men, both of them. And maybe the government cannot ready every facilities, but the private sector is very, very progress, and we have a lot of facilities in about healthcare in Afghanistan. Before that, most of the people for cure goes to Pakistan, Iran, or other countries. But now we can do in Afghanistan. It's very big achievement for women, especially, and for about politics. According to 22 article in Constitution, women and men is equal. Because of that, now, according to election law, should become 2 women from each provinces. It's seat reserved for the women. From each provinces, 2 women comes, and maybe during the campaign, the woman can more than, but these 2 seats is reserved for women from each provinces. Now we have 68 women in the parliament and 23 in Senate, and also. During these 10 years, the women try to get high position in the government also. Now we have 3 ministers and 1 governor, 1 mayor, and also
Let's hear it for that one mayor. There we go.
I think it's not very easy. You will be a mayor, only mayor among the 180 mayor. And also we have women in some women in High Peace Council committee and as a commissioner in Human Rights Commission, and also we have commissioner in election committees, and most of the maybe 50 or more women is provincial is member of provincial council. And also a woman in Afghanistan, it's very active now in social activity. And in social activity, most of them, there are NGOs, they lead by a woman, and also they work in local and international association. And now the women try to make some women networking and also a women movement, sharing to business and civil society. And this is all achievement for women during 10 years. But we have a lot of problems also. You know, I'm from country, I come from the country by the name of Afghanistan, and in this country we fight with international terrorism. And this is very hard. You work as a woman in this country because everywhere it's not very secure for women, and the situation is very tough. So I think if you work is a country, it was very peaceful, but with lack facility is not very. It's not very hard. But if you work in the country, it was very. There is no security, there is no guarantee even after 1 minute. You know, it is very hard. And but during these years, these 10 years, the women take all of this achievement. I think it is very big achievement for the women in Afghanistan. But the problem is. In 2014, we have a presidential election. We hope we pass these big events in Afghanistan very successfully. If we can pass from this event, maybe we can progress and go in, more, and we can open another window for the woman. But if not, maybe we can back to 10 years again. It is very, very, yes, of course. And also another things for women is very worried. The woman is worried about that. It's now the government trying to make agreement with peace agreement with Taliban, but without any mechanism. It is the mechanism is not very clearly for the people. Anybody don't know with which mechanism the government wants make peace and make sign peace agreement with the Taliban. And as you know, the Taliban don't know, they don't want. The woman goes to school, goes to was active in society and in politics. In just take at home, and that's enough for women. But if it was not mechanism, it was not very clear for the people. If the government wants pay for the Taliban about women rights for sharing the Taliban in the government. I think the women cannot accept it. We don't want go back. We want go in. Yeah, yeah. The government and the international community trying to move the women and girls to get education. Now we have 4 million girls who goes to school, but among 6% of the women don't have access to education. Most of the facilities is in big cities, but in the far provinces, maybe the situation is not so good for women, especially because of the security. Security is the main problem in Afghanistan for women. And also about healthcare. Health service, it's not very in far provinces and insecure provinces, women don't have access to healthcare. Even in most provinces, according to the culture, the man don't allow to women goes to hospital. It is big problem also. And violence against women, some during 10 years, it's I think it's decreased, but it's not finished. We read in newspaper, in the in report, in everywhere, the violence against women is increased. Yes, it's two means. One is the public awareness is increased, and the women now don't would like go to record go to record the violence. It's good for it. I think this thing is good because now we can take we can estimation the of violence. But another is I think it's worried. We should find a mechanism how we can increase the violence against women. Decrease, yes. I'm sorry, my English is not very. And the second problem or mentality, the woman is very worried about that, and all people in Afghanistan. It's 2014 is comes very soon, and maybe the international troops go out from Afghanistan. And but the Taliban is here now. Is here in Afghanistan and fighting with the national police, national army, and also with NATO and international troops. This mechanism also is not very clear for the people of Afghanistan. When they go out, the international troops go out from Afghanistan, what happened? Yeah, most. Now we have 1, 2, 3 provinces is completely, not completely, 80%, 70% is under control the Taliban. After that, what happened? And this is some issue the people is thinking and is worried about that. But exactly, the woman in Afghanistan needs education, peace, and security. If it was security, I am sure we have not one mayor, maybe 10, 20 mayors and governors and ministers. And now the women networking is very strong, and they try to move in forward, not in back. And even we have myself as a mayor. When I come to Kabul. I know during the way it's very, very dangerous, and but I have responsibility, and I should have done my job. When I want come to Kabul, maybe it's not possible for me. For example, I come by flight. It's take 2 days. I come from my province, Daikundi, to Kabul. But during these 2 days, I should wear burqa. I should cover my face, and I should change clothes, and I should change my cars several times, because I should because of the Taliban don't recognize me or other person. This is problem, but the woman wants work and wants progress in Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jerry White, and I work at the State Department. And I know we're short on time, and that was very inspiring, both from a teaching and a strategy point of view, but also because I think I would work for any and each of you as leaders. And I wish you would come to be a mayor of Washington, D.C., among other things. But we have great dreams. I know it's a short amount of time, so I'm going to, I had some slides prepared to sort of have some reading and match a couple stories. I'm just going to focus actually on a couple of them quickly. One is just to say where I'm placed at the State Department. It's a new bureau that's only about 18 months old, the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. And that's about how old I am inside the government. I had never really, for 25 years, had never worked inside the government and thought I would never work for the US government. But under Obama and then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, there was the desire to do something change-worthy and entrepreneurial inside the State Department. So this is the newest baby bureau at the State Department, looking at ways to prevent conflict and respond to crisis around the world. I won't bore you with the strategic framework, but in fact it's there. And what's probably the most important thing to think about is how in the world can you affect transformational change on a tough conflict within 12 months? So being a catalyst for change, to cause a policy shift, to move quickly and agilely. This is not something normal for most governments around the world, or even the word bureaucracy, to be nimble. So the challenge was, how can we, in a measurable way, make change happen for some of the toughest conflicts in the world? I myself, because of my past experience leading social change, I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of local and global leaders, and also to study theology and business. So when they pulled me into the State Department, it was because I would be a non-traditional or an entrepreneurial diplomat. So I'm a political appointee in this space. From all of my experience, I'll just touch upon the words on the screen that for strategic or transformational change to happen under your leadership, under all of our leadership, you've heard some of the ingredients already, but I'll quickly go over them. A unifying vision has to be values-based and big, transcendental, the essence of the matter. A strategy. A call to action isn't a strategy. A number, 50 by 50, is not a strategy. A plan is not a strategy. Media outputs are not a strategy. Even a vision is not a strategy. So thinking about how is it that you're going to make vision transform reality, and therefore what is needed along the way, is important. So strategy is about choosing between options, including the status quo. And it's a tough choice. When we present to the assistant secretary or to the secretary, it should never be just an analysis or this is the only way to go. It said, here are a couple options for change. This is why these are very difficult choices. You should sweat in the debate. And then if we do nothing, also a choice. This is what is going to happen. This is our predictive analysis. So when I look at strategy, I always will look with my teams for three things. What's the status quo picture? Doing nothing, it's an option. And then what are two juicy, meaningful strategies that are more than slogans or dreams? Number 3, alignment. Alignment of who you are, how you work, and what you do. I think Carol was saying in terms of attitudes and behaviors and sort of actions or shifts, this is important. There's usually you can find 3 things that need to be aligned, and it's important that all 3 are in action for transformation to take place. 4th is balance, integrated teams, gender balance, equality, equity, inclusion, important to think about the categories there. Number 5 is resilience. It's probably the number 1 issue for leaders. Can you turn breakdowns, problems, obstacles into opportunities for change? As you heard, it's not linear. Things surprise you. There are plenty of problems. And really at the State Department, someone said, you will hear more no's than you have ever heard in your life. No, it can't be done. No, I'm already doing it. No, impossible, etc. Our work as leaders, your work as transformational leaders, begins at the word no. And how to get to yes. If it is right and good, and you all, I imagine, from where you work, have visions of goodness, combined with your hard work, can get to yes. Integrity means, are we who we say we are? Do we do what we said we would do? And can we measure it? So in fact, I have a rule of thumb for new teams in the State Department that if you can't say what we're trying to do, back to Elaine's point about simplicity, and actually you don't design to measure progress or impact, then it can't be done. Don't bother. It bores me. Ideas, thoughts, dreams, unless you can say it, unless you can measurably prove that this will happen, then you have not really designed a strategy. And lastly, 7th is celebration. This reminds me of the book of Genesis, of course, in studying theology, the 6 days of creation. You need 6 things and steps to be happening for the fullness of the creation of your transformation and your strategies. And on the 7th day, you celebrate and you rest. It's the Sabbath rest. It's the peace. It's union. You step back and say, damn, that was good. I'm good. You're good. So here is another slide. There are 5 that maybe might be useful to share later, but the idea is combining who you are, your wisdom, with how you see the world, your seeing, your understanding, and also your know-how, your knowledge, and your doing. That's the alignment of the Troika, and all the best transformational leaders, from Ruth to prophets to King Solomon, theologically in ancient literature, you will see 3 things align: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. I dare say most men, American men, I should say, just speak for myself, tend to go through the middle circle. Technical solutions. You heard it. You come in and you tell people how to fix things. I'm the man. I know how things are done around here. But actually, Washington does that. The world does it. People are comfortable with their CVs. I went to school. I'm good at this. It is important, but not sufficient for change without a unifying vision, without wisdom and essence and values. No amount of excellence will get us to 50 by 50. So lastly, this is what I call strategic target practice. So when you're planning transformational leadership. And in my case, you heard a little bit of a story of how to make the landmine issue turn into a global ban on landmines. I was 20 years old. I step on a landmine when I'm studying in Jerusalem. I go camping with 2 friends, and boom, I lose my leg and I'm bleeding to death in a field in the north of Israel, in the Golan Heights. I spend 6 months in a hospital. I learn to walk with an artificial leg. It's not such a big deal, but for me it's a big deal. I come home and I get on with my life. What is it about that? So I took a personal, many of you, even when you're working on gender and conflict, among other things, have a very personal story, very powerful personal stories that matter to teach. But how can you have a personal story that doesn't keep you a victim, that actually role models in your leadership? So can you, as we say in America, make lemonade out of those sour lemons? Do you have the recipe? So just briefly, in the 4 points, any strategy is going to hit all 4 points of leadership, as we say, wise leadership, but also the coalitions, who's following you. No one survives alone. No one succeeds alone. A leader alone is not a leader. So the coalitions, the networks, the constituencies, the voters, the communities, they are our people to make real change happen that will stick and sustain. And then, are you doing good analytics? Do you have data drive? Not just, it's really important that we stop suffering. I feel for it. No, also get up to the, both the limbic, emotional side of the brain and the math of the matter. Do the math on the problem. And lastly, the resources, speaking of math, how to mobilize the talent, the tools, the training, the resources to get things to happen. And lastly, this was a theme of resilience that I learned from survivors around the world in war zones where I had worked for 20 years. How is it that you don't stay a victim? Myself as well. Depends on the day. To be a victim, you can smell it. You're living in the past. Something awful has happened. You can't change it, but people get stuck on the past. Countries get stuck on the past. Self-pitying, resenting other people's success, blaming, not taking responsibility. And actually, taking is the number one word. A victim tends, when they get ill with victimhood, are insatiable for taking. No amount of love or gifts will give my leg back. So if I hang out in the space of victimhood, no amount of gift will change me. I'm in that space. Leadership, you have it. There's courage in this room, right? There's humor in this room. Humor is the number one sign of resilience. If you aren't making jokes, even during the darkest periods of your work, check on your resilience factor. Humility. Again, it's tough to be a leader. I'm like an arrogant guy, but also I don't know how to do humility. It's except to keep it real and be surrounded by people who keep you honest. Perseverance, we heard about what that takes, and generosity. It's the opposite of taking, is to be a giver and a giver and a giver in small ways and big ways. Those are the super survivors and leaders who are the most resilient. They give. So we learned from survivors. You learned from women. You learned from people with disabilities. You learned from conflict survivors. These are some of the lessons that I have learned that I truly am grateful for. So my idea was just, as much as I've learned in 50 years, I would want to give it away for free. I don't know, because I wish someone had told me some of these things when I was 22 and 25 and 30 and 35. So with that, I will close and say really thank you for your leadership.
Thank you all. The organizers of this program were brilliant in putting all these people together, because I think all of your presentations and your personal experiences really work together very beautifully to lead us to thinking about some of the very powerful elements and approaches for leading change. And Jerry, to end on some very powerful notes with some of the elements and the roadmap that we need to think about. Very Great. Well, I know everyone in the audience probably has a lot of questions. We are limited on time, so let's see how many we have, and we might want to take two at a time. But if you can just raise your hand, and I'll make an effort to have the mic sent over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. I'm so happy to be here. You have all inspired me, and you have added a list to my role models. I have two questions directed to two of the panelists, Azra and Jerry. First, before I ask my question, I would like to quote the greatest ancient philosopher, Plato, who said, "The difference between a man and a woman is the role they play in propagation of species. In anything else, we are equal." So Jerry has got a story. I've got a story like anybody else. My question, how did you consciously make yourself visible to the point of you being appointed to this position out of thousands of people who have stories and probably the background like you? Because I'm aspiring to be a leader also. I want to be somewhere, especially after being invigorated. And then my other question goes to Azra. Understand you, in your presentation, you said women have got fears. They fear that if the Taliban are incorporated into the government, they might bring retrogressive policies detrimental to women's empowerment and progress. Do you have any idea or alternative approach to dealing with the Taliban that would bring a sense of security among women? Thank you.
I'll jump in because that's what right men do. They go first sometimes. Because I know we'll have a better, more wise answer. But just be a leader, all of you. You heard I would say my mother, I have a mother and a father. Those are two genders last time I checked. And they are two different types of role models. So the point of role models, of looking up to people you admire and understanding the qualities and mimicking them, practicing them, being them, is helpful. So my mother was one of these very strong women who raised 6 kids who were born in 7 years. And then she was divorced from my father and had to make a new life. And she became, at age 60, she went to Harvard. And then she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And then she did Tai Chi. And then she became a meditator and started to sculpt in marble. And at 80, is sort of a award-winning sculptor and social artist, I would say. So that's role models right there, strength. So being a leader, I look for people who I hire. This is my last point, and I have a little checklist in my mind of like who a leader is and who I would hire. And most people put before me CVs, what they did. They went to a good school, they worked for a good group, they have these knowledge, they know 20 languages, they know. Most of that is interesting, but a little bit boring. So number one, you first test. Are they a doer? Do they have a track record of getting things done? Not just a talker. I'm an Irishman, so I talk too much. But I also have done some things. Number two, do you burn for justice? Do you burn for humanity? Or is there something that's sort of like makes you angry when you read the newspaper? Trace that passion, that bit of hot fire. Number two, I will look for a pulse of passion in someone because these are long nights working on conflict issues. And number three, do you value, it's an interesting one to ask about, do you value inner space? So in a job interview, I can't quite say it that way, but I will look for, do you still hope? It might be, do you run marathons? Do you meditate? You don't. But is there something in that person's life that show they haven't become a cynical politician with the word no, 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 and no? Do they still hope? Cynicism will destroy leadership. transformation and bring us to victimhood and inaction. So number one, are you a doer? Number two, do you burn for justice? And number three, do you still hope? That's what I would look for in leaders.
Can I just say something in response to that? Because your question about how you get noticed and how you get into different kinds of work. I used to get asked all the time when I was in Cambodia by young women, I'm interested in international relations. I would like to be an ambassador too. How can I do something like what you have done? And what I would have to say to them is, I can tell you how my system works and how I got to where I am, but I know how your system works as well. And frankly, the easiest way for you to get into the foreign ministry is if your father is the foreign minister. And if you're not your father, your uncle. And I think that's, for me, I took a test. It was free. I had to bring my own pencil, and that was all it took to get started on my career path. So those are very different kinds of systems, and I think, my message to those young women was, you want your system to be more fair. You need to help change your society so that people like you who are not related to the ministers have a shot at that kind of a career.
Okay. About your question, I think the government of Afghanistan, they should say to Taliban, because the people of Afghanistan recognize the Taliban as a group, not as a government. So when the Taliban want to join to peace with government, they should accept Constitution of Afghanistan. According to the Constitution of Afghanistan, men and women have equal rights. And also, the Taliban should accept all achievement during these 10 years, especially women rights. If they don't accept, the women cannot accept this group as a part of the government of Afghanistan. It is very important for the women. The Taliban should accept the women's rights and all international and national law about women's rights.
Elaine, did you have anything to add? Okay.
No, let's get some more questions.
Thank you so much. You're all so distinguished, and I learned so much from all of you. Azra, you're very inspirational, and I'm just blown away by your testimony right there. I'm very, very impressed by you, the scholar. Maybe it's okay. You spoke first, I guess. And I want to buy your books, but I won't be able to take them with me because it's probably better if they come through the mail. Through your scholarship, you were talking about the Deus Ex Machina, all these scholarly ideas that you saw in public policy change. What obstacle, through your scholarship, have you identified for women as women participating as change makers, especially in conflict? I understand that we have to be looking for these opportunities. Mm-hmm. We have to be sensitive to the changes and have a sense of humor, as Jerry said. But what, probably one or two that you've identified for women change makers? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your kind words. In many conflict-ridden countries, women are simply too much on the outside, okay? In more advanced democracies, women can be on the outside like Rachel Carson and still have an impact if they have some talent, if they have some insight, etc. But in countries where the structure systematically places women outside of the power structure, and where challenging the power structure is physically dangerous, as you have pointed out. This is an enormous problem for women in many, many parts of the world. Here, women are still outsiders, but there is very little threat to your health or well-being or your children, if you go against the power structure. Okay, you might not succeed, but at least you can do it and try, and you're safe. Okay, it is the safety aspect that really affects women in so many parts of the world, that I've seen, that I've read about, and some of which I've worked in, that really are significant barriers to change. It is one of the reasons why so many people like Secretary Clinton, who I worked with who I've known for many years, it's one of the reasons why so many women of my generation and Secretary Clinton's generation are committed to building international networks for women, because we understand that you need a lot of external help for what you're doing inside your country in a way that that male change agents don't necessarily need. And so we're very committed to that, organizations like this one. And the other thing that's happening in scholarship is in the area of foreign affairs and military affairs, it is still largely defined by male thinkers and by male scholars. So I'll tell you a funny little story. So I am very interested, one of my interests is in pandemics, health issues as they go globally, right? And there's a woman at the Council on Foreign Relations who's one of the world's experts on this issue. So I invited her to a very prestigious center at Harvard, whose name I will not reveal, for a luncheon talk, because my feeling was that pandemics are every bit a security issue as are troops moving across borders. Not one male faculty member showed up. Not one. It was just me and some younger women, some students, etc. And the fight to get non-military issues like health, like environmental degradation, like women's rights and women's opportunities, recognized as foreign policy, national security issues is extremely difficult even in this country. Now, you have wonderful people like Jerry working on these. We have lots of women in the State Department who get it. But the zeitgeist even here, okay, is that foreign policy is about guns and war and missiles, etc., and not about these other very important issues that go transborder. So Hillary Clinton has done a huge amount in this area, but we need more and more organizations like this, because your biggest threat, your biggest obstacle is an obstacle that Carol, myself have never faced, which is the threat to your own personal safety in your countries.
Do others on the panel want to make any comments on that question? Okay. What do you think, Jessica? Two more questions maybe. Okay, or let's group. We've got three here. Maybe we can group these three ladies right here. Yeah, if each can ask, and then we'll have the panel address.
Yes, I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for very inspiring stories. I'm particularly encouraged by Mr. White's story of survivorship. In fact, I think I will buy that book and give it to a relative of mine who is in jail in America, to let him know that you can rise above being a victim. But my comment directly pertains to Ambassador Rodlin's comment that in Cambodia, in third world countries, the major way you get to the top is by being a relative. As agents of change, we are telling our society now that education is a way to progress. It used to be a long time ago that you needed to be related to somebody in government, to be able to progress in life. But as I said, that is what happened a long time ago. And most young people today continue to have the perception that in order to succeed, you need to have a relative. I have several people who come to me, oh, I want to apply for a job in the foreign ministry, but so and so and so. I say, no, you've been to college, you have a degree, apply to the civil service. When you get to the civil service, they will look at your credentials and channel you to the foreign ministry. And if you get a job, if you do get a job in the foreign ministry, one day you will become an ambassador. Or if you don't come to the foreign ministry, you go to the other departments, just be diligent. You will make it to the top. So we are trying to send that positive information out, that go to school, do well in school, go to college. By all means, go to college. Be educated, get an education. I tell people who come to me, even if it is the newspapers, read it every day. You will pass your exams by doing well in English. And that is what the story we are giving out as being agents of change. Thank you very much.
I love that story. Thank you very much for telling me that. That's a very encouraging story. And I was reminded, I was very good friends with the Minister of Women's Affairs in Cambodia, who was a very inspirational leader herself. And she once talked to me about her trouble recruiting for the ministry. And, you know, of course, the foreign ministry, very prestigious, hard to get into. Ministry of Women's Affairs, not so much. She said the only minister who had more trouble recruiting than she did was the Ministry of Agriculture, because parents who had spent a lot of money to have their children educated, you know, they didn't want them to have anything to do with agriculture. So she said she got all of the applicants whose parents refused to let them work for the Ministry of Agriculture. But I think what you say is so important. It's important to talk about it. It's important to push for more transparency. What are the actual qualifications needed for, you know, a position in a certain ministry? They should be written down somewhere. They should be available to the public who's paying, you know, through their taxes for these services. The process needs to become, you know, public and known. And so the more people talk about it, you know, the more the pressure for change builds. So I really, I applaud you for your actions there. Thank you for that.
Those two who had their hands up, maybe we can just group them, and very quick, so that you all can have a very quick break before the next panel.
Hello everyone, my name is Bhavana. I am from Nepal. It is really great pleasure to meet you all and, you know, having a discussion. My question is goes to Jerry. You know, Nepal is also in the post-conflict situation, and landmine issue is very important for us. So transformation and measurable change within 12 months is seems very optimistic. And even though, you know, you structured very well, there are very much structure you have been doing. But I would like to know the achievement that you have gained within your leadership within 12 months. So one question goes to Jerry, and another question for my, you know, writer and researcher book club initiatives. You know, there are lots of theory of change, you know, and you have also talked about the outsider and insider, outsider versus insider. So my question, in our context, you know, there is one theory of change that if there is women in the leadership, then the transparencies happen, you know, if women in the leadership. But if there is a man in the leadership, but besides the man, if there is an influence of female, and there is no transparency. So because we had Prime Minister from Maoist before 3 months, and the Prime Minister was very good, but the female of, you know, the wife of Prime Minister was, yeah, she was not good. And the mindset of people and some research also said that if female are in a leadership, then there is transparency. If male are in leadership, but behind the female, if she is influencing him, and there is no transparency. If you find during your, you know, like research and study, if you find some insights about this, it would be better to know if you find. Thank you.
And the last one, and then we'll have the last word from the panelists.
Thank you very much. My name is Agnes Igoye. Jerry, if you could go back to the survivor and the victim slide. I love that slide. I work with victims of human trafficking. You have a rehabilitation center, so I'm really interested in meeting you with your friend. And also, surviving the war, like Joseph Kony and running and all that. When I look at those three steps, the leadership is the ideal, is where people want to go. But in my experience, and with the experience of people whom I work with, you really go through those others to appreciate the top. Because when things happen to you, you go in shock. You are in shock. You cannot believe somebody did certain awful things to you. And then you step. You cannot just become, the courage, the humility, and all that. So it is work in progress. But I also know that our stories are also tied with stories of other people. For example, with family and with friends. And that is very challenging. Because not all of you are going to move together at that step. And yet you live together. And maybe you work together and you're friends. I don't know whether you've gone through that and how you've worked with it, within your family or within your friends, to appreciate each other as you go through all those. Because this is draining. When you've reached the other top and there are people still this way, it drains you, when you live together. Thank you.
Thank you. Last words, panelists.
Just very quickly to my friend from Nepal. When people study leaders, they realize that at least in democracies, very often an elected leader who managed to become a president or prime minister has, even though they're men, they have marriages in which the women are absolutely full partners and the women are very vested in the career. Part of that is that as you climb that political ladder, it becomes sort of a family enterprise. And in modern democracies, people expect to see the wife, right? So even if it is a man, everybody wants to know who's the wife, what does she think, etc. So there's a process in a modern electoral democracy where the wife tends to have a great deal of influence, particularly as the office gets more and more visible. So people want to know who's the governor's wife, who's the president's wife, who's the senator's wife, etc. And that, in fact, certainly does impact. At a secondary level, however, where maybe your wife is working in a different field or something like that, I think it's actually more important to have the woman as principal. Okay, because here we're talking about breaking down paradigms of knowledge. And that doesn't take, one person really can't do that, right? So the problem that I know Hillary Clinton has been obsessed with for many years, I've known her since, 1977 or something. And the problem that I share, her passion that I share, is this definition of foreign policy and foreign affairs as all about guns and bombs, and not about issues that cross borders, whether it's bad air or disease or whatever, that is equally destabilizing in the world. To get those kinds of paradigm changes, a wife won't do it. You really need to have women actively in the field, whether it's in scholarship, whether it's in diplomacy, etc., changing the thinking of very large institutions. So remember that I know many of you are in the business of creating institutions, okay? We in the United States are in the business of trying to move forward enormous, old entities, right, guys? that have decades, centuries sometimes, in the case of the State Department, centuries of tradition, experience, and thinking. It's a different organizational challenge than creating a new institution. And here we need a lot of people to kind of move these old entities into this new world. And the leading issue in that area, the leading issue is in fact the issue of women in development. And Hillary Clinton has put it on, she was the best one for getting it out there. She did begin doing this, by the way, when she was the First Lady, okay, and continued that into her role as Secretary of State. But the fact of the matter is, God bless her, she won't be around forever. I won't be around forever, right? In other words, we need to build a large network of women who are committed to understanding development and foreign policy through a different lens.
I think such a good point about how all of us can, and each of you can be leaders, not stars. And this idea of not doing it alone, collective leadership, I think is a very interesting one and seems to come more naturally through a nurturing sort of ecosystem, empathetic mindset. So one would sort of, not to stereotype, would say like that natural collaborative space of moving the whole group forward and netting positive is very important. So I mean, I think two things. One is on the survivorship piece, that middle 5 steps, face facts, choose life, reach out, get moving, give back, was after interviews of thousands of survivors from Vietnam to Colombia to Ethiopia to the Middle East, Bosnia, et cetera. And you were finding these patterns of trauma recovery, but the face facts, this awful thing has happened, I can't change it, and my leg's not growing back, or I'm not getting my innocence back, whatever the scar tissue is, becomes actually can become a secret ingredient of where you can find some truth. So facing facts, choosing life, I want hope, I don't want this to define me forever, I want to move forward. The third one, reaching out, is what you said and called family and friends. When you're in the middle of crisis and loneliness as a leader, or in a hospital bed with a lot of pain, or in a prison, you are tempted to believe you are alone. It feels that way. Sheer survivalist mentality is quite singular. But the key is the collective cloud of witnesses, all of you thinking of each other, knowing there's peer support in leadership. And that's one of the great things that Hillary Clinton did as well. She is a mentor leader, and she moves the collective forward in a systemic way that will stick. You saw her do that at the State Department. So collective leadership as part of survivorship, I think, is very important. And also, as the point is, not making it about things and guns and CVs, but about resilience and the community. What do we need for today? And lastly, to the Nepal question, the idea of leadership and how fast you can make change happen. And it sounds awfully optimistic that you could do that in 12 to 18 months, given all of the systemic barriers and ages, blah, blah, blah. And so I think that's actually true. I would just go back and say, whether you're President Obama, how fast did he make the decision to put a woman leader of Hillary Clinton's caliber as his Secretary of State, to invite that forward? That wasn't a year-long decision. They were in a full-out battle in a campaign up until that November, and then a little healing and recovery and conversation, and then a moment of invitation. These are matters of weeks where a policy shift, a leadership change, can change the course of history. So when I am optimistic, it is about something like that. A policy shift on a tough area can set in motion the change, and all of that can happen or be made to happen in 12 months. The landmine question in Nepal, as you said, is an important one. Going back, first there was the research and analysis and changing the narrative. Landmines are a security issue, says all the boys in uniform. We need landmines to protect our troops, says all the establishment. Mm-hmm. We come in and say, interesting. 80% of the victims are like women, children, civilians. Like, this isn't a security issue. Data-driven analysis shifted the narrative to say this is a humanitarian crisis for the world with 80 million landmines in over 80 countries and 80% of the victims being civilians, blah, blah, blah. So boom, and then with a woman like Princess Diana leading on the empathy and compassion front, or at that level of celebrity authentically, working with her in that last year of her life, boom, working with survivors in that year of the landmine, 1997, that won the Nobel Peace Prize in our campaign. That was done. The shift on the landmine story and the cooperation with the foreign ministries of the world. In 1 year, we had drafted a treaty, changed the narrative, invited 122 countries to Ottawa to sign, and did an innovation outside the UN. So you had research and analysis shift, a strategic planning shift. Don't negotiate a treaty in the UN. Let's all meet back here in Ottawa within 12 months with the treaty and its humanitarian provisions done, check, delivered. 3, casting your characters. That's like it's a play. Social action, coordinated action meant, from princesses to survivors to the Pope to leaders around the world. Let's stand up and cast the characters in concerted action and coalition, back to collective leadership. No one person, no one government official, no one NGO, no one star will get anything done today that will sustain. Forget Starship. And then lastly, are you measuring the catalytic change? Do you have in mind what the third act is going to be in your play, the happy ending? You said it sounds rather optimistic. It meant over the last 10 years, we have casualty rates down, tens of millions of landmines destroyed, a sort of moratorium on production and trade, blah, 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 and 160 countries who joined the mine ban treaty. So the system will play out. Even Hillary Clinton's leadership, you'll see her infiltration strategy of talented women like yourselves throughout the bureaucracy of caliber will cause a shift over time that will be playing out over the next 5 to 10 years and will be delightfully important. But it takes that type of collective mindset and leadership that I think you all naturally have. So beware of becoming stars. Be the best leaders that you already are.
On that note, thank you all so much for giving it so much time this morning to talk about this very important issue for our delegation. And short break or no? Okay, a very short break, and then meet back here for the second panel. Thanks so much.